significantly infuse cultural context and nuances into the respective communication and languages of the brand, and that way it resonates even better with the target audience, especially in the market in which they serve. And of course, there was a good spark of energy to the start of conversations with a presentation by Thebe Ikalefeng, who sparked a conversation in and around highlighting the...
There you're able to talk about, okay, this is... So really being is what I think.
Thank you, Tina. Perfect segue into my next question. So all I remember when it comes to a child being fed like fleas or mosquitoes around it. And I say you want to tug at the heartstring of people who... How are you, I know you said it's changed a bit, but I still... Governments are not there yet. And the idea is, and I'll finish now, is not to keep them there. Nobody wants to keep funding Africa. We want to see Africa develop because as a country graduates, we pull in the next one. Countries graduate. And it's been shown to be done. Brazil was in a bad way. Now it's come out. It's a middle-income country. We want to see that. We really do. So it's in nobody's interest to have flies constantly on people's faces for years and years. That means we're all bad at our jobs.
And I think one of the things we say in our field, at least it says a lot, is we are working to put ourselves out of a job. That's what we do in our field. And, you know, there's a lot of back and forth between aid and not aid. And now I am a funder, but, you know, as I was saying before this, I was 10 years in the UN, so I was a recipient.
We started 60 years ago as an organization helping after the Korean War in South Korea. And over the years, it took 25 years to get them to a place where they could begin to start helping themselves. And then they start taking over all of the work that they do in their own country. And today raise over $300 million for work in other countries. It's an amazing story that each of our offices are aspiring to do. At an industry level,
that's how I know now. And I say certainly from the Gates with government, because we realize, and there are a lot of smart people in Seattle who are doing exactly work even though they ask us sometimes, and actually governments sometimes don't want to be directly funded because it's actually difficult for them to get the money out themselves to do the work, but they need technical assistance. We provide that. We fund health systems. We fund partners to help government grow its health systems. We sometimes put people into government to help them. So there are lots of ways we work in partnership, because I think the key thing is we cannot, and no development organization can do it on their own. And that's key. We have to work with local governments. Thank you, Marky.
Governments are gatekeepers, right?
Yeah.
They're gatekeepers is a gateway drug. You can't go into someone and just say, I am going to do this, just like Marky said. Both at the UN and with Mastercard Foundation, we do not go anywhere unless the government has given us the okay to go. You know, the UN got a lot of flack about working in Syria as well, you know, with Assad and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is, you have to have some sort of respect. And the way to get things done is you have to partner with the government.
Sean?
Well, we're all sitting here in Kigali, where we get to see what strong leadership in a clear direction, what the outcomes of that are. And so I've had just a wonderful pleasure as an implementing organization here in Rwanda, getting to partner with the Rwandan government. And we partner with about 8 different ministries, and especially at the grassroots level, each of the mayors here in Rwanda all have development plans, and they have accountability scorecards that they're held accountable for from the national government. And it's a pleasure to come alongside of them, not step on each other's toes, but to coordinate with them and say, here, what are your gaps? Where are the areas that you need to fill, and what can we do to help fill some of those gaps with the limited resources that we have? It's the idea of working together rather than working at odds with each other. And when we go together, we go much further than when we go alone.
Okay, so I'm going to go a bit off tangent now. So you know how you mentioned how certain governments cannot fund maybe healthcare, or I'm just adding education. So I'm from Ghana, Accra, Ghana, where we have free high school education now, and there's been, for some people, a bit backlash thinking that, you know, this is not the time, it's not necessary. Of course, I'm like, yay, because we see the benefits later. People are like, you know what, how about you cut down our taxes, we get more money and just build more roads. So like you said, there's donor fatigue. At some point, the funds are going to run out. How do we educate the masses on the continent about the benefits or the impact of great healthcare system, excellent education, and other intangible perks? How do we educate the masses about that, the benefits of those things? Because at some point, you are going to leave.
Yeah. That's a really interesting question. I think it is known that when someone goes to high school, their earning income triples between elementary, primary, and high school, right? That is known, that is evidence-based, that is fact. I think one thing that's really, really important for us as development organizations, and I feel us who are more global, is to make sure we're working with the community. I think if we do not have those small local community organizations, if we are not working in partnership with...
Help out here in Rwanda to meet these needs, so can get up and speak for themselves, change and...
Yeah, I think we all know is critical, and I think that a country to educate its people. Traditionally, a lot of countries have not been focused on it or out very poor. For us, the foundation, we are doing a little bit in opportunity is in the sort of primary education. So no matter what you do later on, it's too late. Kids cannot age 5, 6, and they're not being assessed. They just go through to high school. The World Bank recently launched this Human Capital Index, and what it's saying, it's trying to motivate spending on health and education. The education being ensure the quality of the education is better. A country like Uganda, that means that a child born in Uganda today is 38% it's going to gosh, how do we say this? It's to reach its potential. Index mean it'll reach 38% of its potential than a child born in a country with a higher index. So we know that actually if we don't educate kids now, who is going to drive the buses, build, sit in the offices, take these jobs that we're trying to push people to do? So I think that it shouldn't be external people saying governments should.
I'll take a shot at that. Yeah, it's something that we deal with. Thank you very much for the question. This is a challenge certainly for the industry. Is that today there's a lot of dialogue about meeting domestic needs, and that is true in many countries, and something that we face, especially in the terms of meeting the needs of refugees. Rwanda here hosts about 200,000 refugees. It's incredibly difficult to raise resources to help these people, because they is one of these forgotten crises that don't always show up in the media, and so we try to both highlight those needs, highlight the progress, but also highlight responsibility of the global community to the globe. We are not just an island. Any country is not just an island. We're affected by each other, more so now than probably ever before. And we want to continue to not only focus on domestic needs, but on needs that surround us. The other way that we are mitigating this is by looking at how do we be more effective with the resources that we have. I oftentimes challenge our team to say, yes, we have these limited resources, but what can we do with the resources that we have? And where might there be resources locally. I often sort of ask the question of our team, Africa, I believe, is by far the most generous continent I've ever lived on, and I've lived on a number of them, but it's not always done through the formal mechanisms. It's oftentimes done informally, and that may be fine, or it might make more sense to formalize some of those mechanisms. And so we're asking those questions of ourselves. I don't think that people want to only look out for themselves. I truly believe that most of us want to look out and meet the needs of vulnerable people around the world if we understand them and understand what can be done with relatively little resources.
Okay, could we ask you to please give us your name and country you're from? The first question was from Nelson, and he comes from Kenya. We have another question here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Clem Ugoji from Nigeria. And I've worked in the sustainability space, obviously working with a number of NGOs in the last 15 years. And what is very clear to me is that the problems that the NGOs are trying to solve, the social issues, are essentially a symptom of the failure of governance in Africa. Because come to think of it, I think most of the issues, if we had good governance, I think that significantly a lot of these problems would be resolved. And so my question is, when you continue to deal with the symptoms, but the root causes are there, so how is the NGO community, trying to influence the evolution of good governance in Nigeria? I know it's a very tricky space to play because of the political issues and all of that, but I think it's also about time that the NGO community builds capacity in helping to improve governance on the continent.
The West for the development of African countries, because we still remain at the end of receiving monies all over and over again.
So I'm not sure, what your question was, what are organizations, donor organizations doing to make sure that their programs are sustainable and that the countries actually continue to fund them? Yeah. Look, I know very few funders, and forever. The Gates Foundation, our grants are typically 2, 3, 4 years, and it's supposed to be catalytic funding. It's supposed to catalyze either other donors to come in or governments to actually get to the stage where they are ready to start doing it themselves. The most successful program actually at the foundation is one that was called the Global Libraries program, which was sunsetting. It was actually stopping. So when they were making grants, they were making those grants knowing that they actually, after 3 years, they were not going to be around, because what they were doing was starting something and handing it over to actually the national libraries in the countries they were working on to carry on with. That's what a successful program looks like. So that sustainability is actually built in, because we are not designed to. The Bill and Melinda have actually said that a number of years after their death, the foundation will stop. So it's not forever. And I think countries, governments, everybody needs to know that no money is forever. There's got to be a way that, the countries continue it themselves. And just quickly, one of the things I think the person who asked the question about, the organizations that we work with, we try and make sure that we're working with the local organizations, because big organizations, global, they will leave or they will follow where the money is. You're committed to making it work in Nigeria. We want to fund more people who have a vested interest in to make those, to continue the programs.
Do you mind if I add something? Okay, the only thing I'd add to that is that I think this highlights an opportunity for us to do a better job of communicating how we work. Here in Rwanda, the question sort of doesn't quite resonate with me because, how are you working with governments? Every year before we do anything, we both get sign-off from every ministry that we work with, as well as each district. And there's a formal process for doing that in a system, and we sign off on, here are the agreements, here are the deliverables that the government wants us to do, and then we go and do and implement that through the course of the year, through local organizations, through partners, through the community itself, and building capacity from within, and are always appreciated for that, and that helps the whole system begin to operate, and you see those changes happening. If that's not happening, that is a failure of good governance that needs to happen. But that is our role as an NGO, is to come alongside these communities that have some of those gaps and to help fill those, but not to take over. We don't ever see ourselves as taking over, because we are going to leave eventually. We want to.
I think we need to, put it out there and realize that yes, there are some NGOs that exploit the system. There are NGOs and that do not do what they're supposed to do, and they focus just on people going in, getting the per diem, and that. We're not saying that doesn't happen, but there are a lot of NGOs that do a lot of incredible work, right from grassroots, right all the way to the grass tops. And I think many times it's, those good stories, that good narrative by the whole is money, all they want ever. Really, there are a lot of NGOs that do good work as well.
We take 2 last questions and wrap up the session. May I ask you to please stand?
Hi, my name is Elaine from South Africa. I wanted to find out, with the reduction in aid from agencies like USAID, is there enough alternative to get the work that needs to be done in Africa? And what are the implications? I know that in South Africa, people are, NGOs are quite worried about the impact on the constant threats on reduced aid.
So I can give an example of that. The President of the United States is not a great fan of the United Nations. And he has cut funding for reproductive health, which is UNFPA. And when it was coming out saying that the U.S. is no longer going to fund UNFPA, which has majority of its projects in Africa, Norway stood up and said, we are going to go and put in some money. And then other small countries stood up and said, we're going to do the same thing, number one. Number two, I think in our industry, we have realized that we cannot just depend on the DFIDs and the USAIDs and things like that. So that's why the UN started this thing called Global Compact, which really is a whole thing of businesses all around the world coming together to say we are going to do our part to help to get to the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the global goals, because started realizing that private sector can play a huge part in this, and it's a part that we hadn't been taken advantage of. So you have Dangote, who is part of Global Compact. So they're African people, but there's Strive Masiwa. There are a lot of people who have organizations or private sector that are coming in and saying we are going to try and do our part to help kind of fill in some of the gaps.
Our final question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my name is Cletus. I'm from Nigeria. I just wanted to take us a bit back to yesterday, because there's something I heard today that was kind of a continuation of a narrative that was in Africa today, are traceable to our history, whether it's colonialism or the Berlin Conference, or today I heard a bit of it, the missionaries coming to Africa. And when I think about that, I kind of feel, and I wanted to get your perspective, whether we feel that always going back to this narrative kind of takes attention away from our responsibilities as Africans to actually lead and to actually manage our own contribution, like rule our own destiny. Are we blaming history a little bit too much? And that kind of diverts attention from our own responsibility. I really want this to be discussed because, again, I heard it in the context of the AIDS, like we have to have respect, when it comes to AIDS and all that, because we are Africans. So I just wanted us to, kind of dwell a bit on this.
Can you hear me? Well, I'm sure you heard his question, but I think the response about the imagery. It was a question I asked about imagery, and she said those images didn't start with development agencies, it started with missionaries. It was just the imagery. It wasn't blaming missionaries for our problem. But then again, the question is thrown out, so please feel free to answer his question.
It was about the imageries and where people have that image of Africa. It wasn't about Africans and what Africans are doing or responsibility that Africans do have to take care of themselves.
I would just add that I think it's important to know where you come from in order to figure out where you're going. So I think understanding how we got here is great, and we need to keep that open, and we need to make sure our children and our grandchildren understand why we got to where we are. But it shouldn't be what holds us back. We should just be charging ahead.
Just using Rwanda as an example in this, you know, Rwanda hasn't run away from its history. You're all welcome. I hope you get the chance to visit the Memorial Museum here. It's a wonderfully done museum. There are commemorations of the genocide that we remember that each year, and it's a challenging time here. But Rwanda's not staying in that place. The Rwandans have come together and have three priorities: unity, going together, and holding each other accountable, and dreaming big. And that's where they are going. And I've just gained a great appreciation for both understanding history and accepting that and understanding that, but also not staying in that history, but moving into the future that the Rwandan people.
To my brilliant panelists, thank you, Maki, thank you, Tina, and thank you, Sean. A round of applause for my amazing panelists, please.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Moderator,
yes,
because Hillary actually took this on this morning. So for a lot of reasons, I just want to say thank you for doing a great job.
Absolutely.
My pleasure.
All right. While you take your pictures, I would like to say a big thank you to you. Could you stand together for pictures, please? Okay, amazing conversation there, and of course some key highlights we can infer from that discussion was in and around collaboration, how partners and non-governmental organizations should work closely with governments as partners. And of course, in telling their stories or putting out the narrative, it's important that they work closely with the media team, who Tina was very specific as referring to as partners. Of course, we all should be partners in progress. And it was also mentioned by Sharon, no government can do the work on their own, and it's important that we realize this. And of course, he highlighted the fact that for World Vision, it is an example to show that governments can actively participate in funding the work done by the organizations. Using the World Vision example, that Rwandan government actually fund the work that they do in the country. Brilliant conversations. One more time, please, let's put our hands together for the first session of today. We're moving on very quickly to the next conversation, which is in and around advertising and marketing in Africa. And essence of our gathering, begin to chart position and hope for, and it's important that we begin to see in a very positive way should resonate, especially as we look at local nuances, cultural hotspots, and global relevance of our messages and communication intentions. But before I introduce the panelists for this session, I know some of you may want a connection to the internet, especially as you want to tweet or join the conversation online. To start off, the conversation is online. Use the hashtag Speak for Africa or hashtag GAFCON 2019 to access the internet connection available in the convention center. Username is KCC, all in caps. KCC, password is KCC. Username KCC, password KCC. Please feel free, connect, and do remember to tag us in your tweets, your pictures, and of course, this conversation. Hashtag Speak for Africa, hashtag GovCom 2019. We move on now into the next session. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Managing Director, King James, Johannesburg, South Africa, Lesotho Kotane. Joining Lesotho will be Brad Ross, Marketing, Consumer and Commercial Director, Coca-Cola West Africa. A round of applause for Brad. Unfortunately, Julia couldn't join us today, but we also have joining this panel conversation the Chief Operating Officer, Leo Burnett, Nigeria. Please welcome Lekon Lawal. And with pleasure, I would like to call on Homolemo Lolo Madiklekla, who will be moderating this panel. And Lolo is from IMC Consultant, Botswana. A round of applause for Lolo. I'm sure, Lolo, this will make an interesting conversation, being the only lady among the three gentlemen. You're most welcome. The stage is yours, Lolo.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, I'm both honored and very excited about this particular session. I think in quite a number of yesterday's talks, there was hinting about how this particular session should be unearthing a lot of topics that are necessary to be provoked and just toiled with. We live in a bustling, exciting, emerging market. We are not and never will be short of problems to solve. Those are words by Musa Kalenga in his book, Ladders and Trampolines. So this particular session, what I would like to have come out from each sector is really what success looks like. What these nuances that we, are there nuances? And to play devil's advocate, are these not just comfortable, convenient, well-categorized ways of stereotyping and safely demarcating ourselves from one another based on geography, based on popular culture, and spaces of familiarity? Seeing that it's Leo Burnett, King James, and Coca-Cola, I would really love also your philosophies to be coming out in this particular discussion. So what keeps you up at night? What industry problems are you wanting to solve? Lesotho, if you can start.
Is this on? Hello, okay. Good morning, everybody. What's keeping me up at night? I think so let me maybe start with the philosophy question. So for me, you know, like the two things as King James, as an agency that sort of we believe and we hold firmly to is one, our our African origins, independence, and kind of commitment to building brands locally. And I think the second thing is that first and foremost, we are a creative company. So I suppose for me, it's the fight and the energy and the I guess, like making the case for creativity, making the case for African creativity, for African stories, for, you know, and really kind of making sure that creatively we can make our clients compete on the world stage. I think it's often like, oh, Africa needs to look west or east, or for like inspiration and reference, and I think not enough inward look at. Tebe yesterday spoke about this idea of African protectionism, and like I really like that, like looking inwards, finding our stories from within and stuff. So I think for me, it's even in a globalized world, or global brands or whatever, is really saying like there is a place for creativity, there's a place for African creativity, and using creativity as like a powerful force to build businesses, build brands, and add value, from that perspective. So for me, it's more conversations need to happen about the case for African creativity, I guess, yeah.
Okay.
Should I take it?
Yeah, you take it from
All
your
right,
minute.
Thank you very much for this session. What keeps me up at night? I would say ROI. When I say ROI, I'm not talking about return on investment, I'm talking of return on impact. Now, the peculiarity of Leo Burnett is the fact that it's a humankind agency. For our long history, we're all about putting value at the center of the conversation. So it's not about client, it's not about the target audience, it's not about the budget, it's about people, it's about human. It's about how do you bring them into that conversation. So for every opportunity we have to solve a problem, we look at it as a human problem. And when you look at it as a human problem, the onus is on you to look for the original situation, not just as a result of gaining market share. How do you impact people? How do hearts become acts? How do you convert heart to act? Because the only way you can impact, as a matter of fact, the only way you can even get that ROI is when you put the people at the center of the conversation, when you see the problem through their eyes and through their lenses. And so, for everything we do at Leo Burnett, that has always been the crux. We score ourselves, we have a score from 1 to 10, and we put the round figure as 8. That at the point where you score yourself 8, it means that you've hired that impact to the people, and the people are happy, and based on their experience with your brand, they are able to now relate with it. To round it up, you take it from a point of view of purpose to participation, and from participation to populism. If you can't get to that point, then it's just going to be like a rat race, just trying to meet a budget, trying to meet a brief, and that's how it is. Thank you.
Okay, and you talk about human-centered design, basically, and solutions from that perspective. Do you find that that is something you communicate easier from a Western context, or you're able to brief this in from a local depth and nuances, taking the cultural perspectives into the discussion?
I'm going to give an analogy of this popular saying when you say a man went to India and saw about 1 billion people with no shoe, and he said, wow, this is a business opportunity. Yeah? So talking about nuances, talking about localizing, let's say for a Leo Burnett, yeah, if I were to go to India and I will see the same 1 billion people with no faith, I will think of a human need. You should always start with why. Why are they not wearing shoes? Is this something that is akin to their culture? So you need to find, it's not trying to put some wall, in your geography to make it easy for you. It's about saying that if I don't get your heart, yeah, I can't get your head. And if I don't get your head, I can't get your pocket. That's just it. So you have to locate your communication in the heart of the people. I'll give you an experience again. About 3 years ago or 4 years ago, we got a brief from our partner agency in South Africa, from a company in South Africa, to say, you know what, it's December, we need to put some boxes, so just take this material and then run it. And we said, you're not going to sell a box with this. And then we had to look at what matters to Nigerians during December and speak to them in that language. But if we did not do that, yeah, it would have been struggling with trying to sell a box. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. When we think about, or what I think about, what keeps me up at night is about remaining relevant. I think the world is becoming smaller. We're a 130-year-old brand. And how do we continue to remain relevant with our consumers? How do we take the best of some of the global values that our brand stands for and make sure we can put them in a way that brings it to life relevantly for our consumers? And the role of technology, the role of speed of access has changed the game a little bit. But you always have to go back to human insight at the bottom and try and understand it. And when you think about the culture and how you think about what culture means and how you actually access relevant culture, I think there's three things that you have to consider that are very, very important. Firstly, it's authenticity. I think that consumers can see a fake a mile away. And so if you're trying to tap into culture, but you're not doing it in an authentic manner, I think you have an inherent problem then, because the fakeness will come through. I think secondly, it's about what your brand values are. What does the brand stand for? What does the brand try and achieve? And how do you attach the values? And then thirdly, it's about purpose. Is there a higher order purpose that you as a brand or as a company are trying to achieve? And when you can weave that together with the understanding and the authenticity of being able to be locally relevant, I think that's where the relevance starts to come from.
I like that very much, and I believe you've done very well as Coca-Cola to bring a consistent aspect of caring about happiness and being able to do that universally. I don't know how to put it, but I'm a pure testament of a beneficiary from a Coca-Cola perspective. My father is a retiree. I'm a caretaker. But to date, Coca-Cola as a brand still looks after his medical aid, and he's over 70. So it's little things like that that connect you to a brand. It's beyond just a drink. It's somebody's household, somebody's life, way after, he's probably, 15 or so years post retirement. So thank you for having that much of a heart. You do change lives.
Thank you.
I like what you said around authenticity. Yes, we are in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and very ambiguous. And you also touched on the technology aspect. What I want to know is, right now, the dogma in vogue is the fourth industrial revolution. What are we as brand marketing and communications experts doing? What are we intentionally working on in terms of not only problem solving, but solutions creating? Most of the time, it'll be an engineering business or unit, and yesterday somebody spoke about putting lipstick on a pig, or really bringing in the aesthetic component to a solution. Is there a plan in place within your institutions around being innovative and being very deliberate and intentional about solving key issues? Maybe you want to start, Lisa.
So I think in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, I think it's obviously a big topic. I think there's only been 4 of these revolutions, I suppose, and if I go backwards, like if I think of the first one, which was the printing press, what that did for communication and what it did for mass reach and what it did for stories that could go kind of widespread, for me was incredible at the time, and it really changed society. I think that so if I bring it back to today, the temptation is, and a lot of times when we talk about it or we in conversations with clients and stuff, there is sometimes this tendency to be fearful, to be kind of intimidated by it, and but I think if you think about socially what access to technology is going to do, and I mean if I think about it like in an African context, like access to tech that's cheap, that's low cost, that is accessible, is going to democratize knowledge. It's going to democratize information. It's going to democratize, and I think the benefit of this time is the scale at which it's going to happen. So, for me, I think it's from a place of optimism around it, to say like, what does it mean for, at least from a communication perspective, what does it mean for new ways of telling stories, new ways of bringing brands in front of people, innovative ways of sort of delivering those narratives, I mean, I agreed with your earlier point about Coca-Cola. I mean, if I think about 180 years of always being in tune and always playing to wherever the trend is at, or not the trend, but wherever the world is moving to, and being able to stay relevant in that way. So I think it's always a case of going, how do we create opportunity out of this, instead of like being fearful around it and stuff. And I think managing that for me is the constant like challenge, because it's a lot of stuff, it's a lot of jargon, it's a lot of like the engineers are in the room now, so it can be quite intimidating,
Just before I extend the similar question to the other gentleman, I like how you took it back to the fundamentals of what it is that those very innovations will be solving. There's a book, The Prosperity Paradox. It's by Professor Clay Christensen with Efosa Ojomo and Karen Dillon. And they talk about market creating innovations. Okay, so I just something down that I want to share, that these type of innovations transform complex and expensive products and services into simple and more affordable products. Just what you said, making them accessible to a whole new segment of people in a society whom we call non-consumers. So that's really just the democratization that you just alluded to right now. And sometimes we over-glamorize solutions creating. So I really like the fact that you're saying, yes, I might not have the technological solution now, but my core is I want to ensure that the bottom line is affected. And what these market creating innovations do, they create jobs, create profits, and have the potential to change the culture of entire societies. So my interest is to say, within marketing, within branding, within communications, what are we deliberately doing to ensure that in wanting to be relevant, in wanting or ensuring that we are relevant or remain relevant, what is important? What are we being relevant to? Are we participating in the Sustainable Development Goals, and in so doing, how? And I want to hear it come out really clearly in terms of what the specialists in this space are doing, because I believe a lot is done, but we don't articulate it because we are normally support or enablers of teams that do that.
So I'll answer that question in the context of being in the industry as a practitioner, because you have the role of the marketing communication agencies, you have the role of the brand as well. So we need to separate that first and foremost. Can we agree on that? Now, having said that, it all goes back to our own philosophy. That's the philosophy of Leo Burnett. To say you have no other choice than to add value, than to make impact. And so what we do deliberately is, and it's a scorecard for us. It's a scorecard for us, is to ensure that we get deliberately involved in activities that will, give back. For instance, I'm sure you are aware of the Cancer Aware. Every year, when it's about the time when we do the activities to mark the cancer under that, virtually everything that is done from a marketing communication point of view is taken on by Leo Burnett Lagos. Not only, I'm not talking of designs and all of that, it goes beyond that. It goes to going to the field with them. It goes to being an advocate. It goes to spending quality hour like a week or so with them to ensure that we feel you and we want to be with you, I want to celebrate you. That's one thing. Another thing we do is to say, the younger guys are growing and they are coming up. And you can understand that there are challenges about employment opportunities in certain part of Africa and all of that. So what we then do is that for every May Day in our organization, that will say, you know what, as many as 10, 20, come and work for us for a day, we'll pay you for a month. That's what we'll do. And then what we've done that day is not just paying them, it's telling them that, look, number one, if I can be here, you can be here. Number two, we believe in you. We believe in your dreams. And so, but it is not an act of, what do you call it now? CSR? No. It is part of our DNA. It's something that we must do. So that's why I said we need to separate and say, as a marketing communication organization, it is a deliberate effort that we follow through most of the time. And we are also open to it. One of the things we want to do for this year is to say, we're going to take on about 20 startups and give them all the SME toolkits that they will need. And my colleague is sitting down there, is primarily responsible for doing that, and I'm sure that's why he has gray hair at a very early age. Thank you.
I think this technological advancement era that we're living in is both equally awesome and frightening at the same time. I mean, you only need to look at The Great Hack and Black Mirror and things like that where you see the bad side of technology. But there's a lot that technology gives that enables so much. I think for Coca-Cola, and we've never been a technology-driven company or a technology-first company, but we want to use the power of technology to enable either what we're doing from a marketing comms point of view to actually create a difference in the world. And so when we look at programs like 5 by 20, which is about empowering 1 million African women by 2020, we're using technology to help with that. So it's whether it's helping young entrepreneurial African women set up their businesses and using technology to help them actually with the order system to get the point of sale, to start doing the accounting back end. These are the things that we as a company are trying to untap and make accessible to people across the continent. So I think technology can be seen sometimes in a bad light, but if you harness it for its good things and the power, it can really drive great stuff coming out in the future.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to ask one question. Are we able to involve the audience sooner? Yeah, okay. So now I want you to shed more light with regards to who is your critical mass right now? And what are the dynamics within that target audience? I'll be very interested to understand your audiences and their diversity, the digital nomads, and so forth.
Again, my critical mass will be different from your critical mass. So, for us, it's how do I answer this now? For us, it's about the critical mass. It's the one that we feel that are ready to be the next frontier of development in the country. Yeah, the critical mass is that person, that individual that has that strong potential. Yeah, it doesn't really matter whether it's a digital nomad, whether it's BYO, people of the pyramid, or it's an HNI or something, but it has something that he has to give, and we want to be part of that. The critical mass to us from a marketing communication point of view is that client, that is coming to say, beyond making money, this is what I want to do. The critical mass, is any individual, government, or private body that is saying, this is where we want to put a human face to our brand. It could be a country, it could be a corporate, it could be a person, but you want to have a human face. You want to live people. That's our critical mass. Thank you.
I think we're trying very hard to become a total beverage company. And that means offering choice for all your hydration needs, whatever they may be. And then when we look at our portfolio of brands and we segment and we go back to the normal segmentation and we say, okay, who's our target market? We look at different target markets for different brands. Some of our target market is focused on teens. Some is focused, and we're actually moving into some of the adult type opportunities as well that we haven't untapped in the past. So the critical mass for us ultimately is the consumer. How we segment our portfolio and our offering will depend on what the beverage is, what the need state is, and what that opportunity is that we're trying to talk to. But it goes beyond just the consumer. Obviously, the consumer is our end user. But as a corporate citizen, we also interact a lot with media, with governments, with NGOs, with various stakeholders. And so we have to keep our mind across all those elements in terms of who we're actually working with.
I'm going to be a bit controversial, but I guess from my optic, my critical mass right now is my clients, because and a lot of my energy is going there, and I don't mean clients as in brands. I mean like individuals, because I think I'm finding the environment that I'm dealing with right now is presenting itself with some really interesting challenges for us. So, for example, I've got clients in some businesses, like the juniorization of marketing, so kind of less strategic and more tactical, and it's kind of you bouncing from pillar to post instead of having the bigger conversations, because of that fact. Access, because we deal with some global brands that operate, kind of South Africa as a region, but head office is US or whatever, and so the difficulty of sometimes getting access to the right people, shrinking budgets, and kind of the pressure that has on choices that have to be made around where each rand and cent has to be spent and where it's going to be redirected to. A lot of investment is going from kind of communication into like services, and sort of what does that mean, and how do we show up there? And then I guess some clients just want to be famous. So what do we do to help them be famous and to help them be the rock stars in their businesses? So a lot of these dynamics, kind of affect the choices that get made, the conversations that get had. Also, the reality of a very, very difficult economic climate, and you can actually physically see the pressure that it puts on marketing, because now it's like every rand matters, and it's on you and it's on the client. I mean, to deliver, to fix, to turn around. So the psychology, I think, for me right now is quite tense, and kind of managing those pressures. And then, of course, to the earlier point, the people that work for us, so my and just the health of people, the well-being of people, the psychology, because it's a lot to ask for people to come every day and come up with ideas and solve problems, and advertising can be quite a ruthless industry from a pressure perspective. So how do you make sure that you actually, and I don't think we're famous for HR, so I think as an industry, so I think managing people's just well-being is important, yeah.
If I'm hearing you correctly, you're also touching on the importance of retention, looking after, going the extra mile for existing clients, even if it's a small pool. And building relationships is about functional delivery as well as emotional connection, which I'll be coming back to. Just want to invite the audience to be a part of the discussion, and then I'll ask more questions.
Thank you, Lolo. May I also kindly request that the panelists speak into their respective microphones? The participants could barely hear your comments most of the time, so speak into your microphones. We've got a first question here.
Good morning. My name is Tolu Alokbeya Musum from Nigeria. Okay, my question relates to the return on impact. Now, isn't it contradictory to say what brands are looking at in Africa basically is sales rather than in making impact, so to speak? I say that with a comma, because if you look at the adverts and what we get on screen is what is in vogue, their trends, their nuances assumed to be generally acceptable. However, they do not speak the intent, the values, the nitty-gritty of the African culture. So take, for instance, I know that over time, what is seen is what is generally accepted. What are brands trying to do to infuse trends, patterns, to infuse culture, values, African values into adverts such that they begin to tackle the issues of the current African narrative, so that in the long run, it becomes generally acceptable?
Sorry. Thank you so much for that question. I'd like you to answer that, also just harnessing the importance of local resonance.
First and foremost, I'd like to clarify that when I said impact again is seen as a double-edged sword. Yeah, impact to the client and impact to the audience. But the impact has to go to the audience first. They need to feel something before they can have a relationship with your brand. Now, if you put up a piece of artwork there for the purpose of selling your product, you can agree with me that product are, there are so many out there. There is product parity. There are all kinds of parity out there. So you need to be able to think beyond just the return on investment for you to get that investment. And that's the thinking. And that's the reason why now that most communication have gone beyond just selling, to relating. And that is where the issue of local nuances come in. And I'll repeat what I said earlier. If you don't know me, you can't relate with me because you won't know how to relate with me. And then you can't sell to me. If you don't have a deposit to my heart, there is no way you can connect with me. Brands have seen this, and they are really doing a lot about that. Most of the commercials you see now in the past, say, 2-3 years, are not commercials just say, come and buy. They're about saying, this is who we are, this is what we've done. Impact can be anything. Yeah? Some, you come in contact with the commercial, and you are laughing from morning till night, and you wake up the next morning, you are still laughing. And you get to the supermarket, the first thing that strikes you is that commercial, and then you see the product and you buy. Another one, there will be no relationship to the product. It's just to say, this is who we are as a brand, and this is what we have come to do, and all of that. So I beg to repeat again that the best way to connect to the market, the best way to connect to the African consumer is not through preaching at him or her. It's about connecting. It's about making impact and ensuring that at the end of the day, your brand is remembered for something other than selling. That's the point I was trying to make. I don't know if my colleagues also try to contribute to that.
Yeah, go for it. No, yeah, I mean, I think in my mind, I think I kind of, talk a lot about this idea of every market and every customer or every brand needs to speak to its audience with first and foremost respect and with kind of a personal truth, and to be honest, I don't believe, and I'm going to make a kind of a broad general observation, but I think brands on the African continent aren't doing it enough. I don't think they're doing it properly. Not all brands. I think some brands get it right, but I think for me it's because there is a level of disrespect for an African consumer, and I think, you know, it's yesterday, I think it was Gina, but in one of the talks, the point was made about a single story. You know, you have to appreciate that it's ridiculous to suggest, you know, from a marketing perspective, a single story. You know, we're one continent of 55 countries, 55 very different markets that behave very differently from each other with very different realities. I don't even, to be honest, like the word nuance, because nuance suggests like a little shift, you know. The reality is that there are very different truths and very different behaviors and very different cultures playing out. And I mean, I see it like local marketing back home is that paintbrush of, it's a very particular looking person, a very particular looking sound, color, like there's a typecast relevant, you know, thing. So, you know, so I think the appreciation, I don't think enough is being done around saying, how do we measure impact that is around a true understanding and a true representation of the audiences that we serve, and not kind of, because it's lazy for me. It's lazy to go, you know, just put black people in the ad, or, you know, just put a Burna Boy soundtrack there, you know, they'll love it. That's just lazy marketing, you know, and I don't think enough is being done to truly understand the audience and their realities, and then deliver that in a kind of a really interesting and entertaining and intelligent way, you know.
Hello. Hi, yes, good morning. My name's Simon Crump. I work for Portland. We're an international PR agency. I've actually got two questions, if you'll indulge me. My first question to anyone on the panel is, I think, especially in PR or within the sector generally, there's a bit of discussion about how PR and advertising and marketing, the lines are blurring between them. And, you know, agencies are struggling to sort of think about how do we respond to, you know, other sort of client needs besides, say, issuing a press release. How are you seeing it in your respective countries, and how are you responding to it, or how do you deal with it? And my second question is, you know, I think there's a lot of interesting, exciting campaigns, you know, that you guys are doing across the continent. So I'd like to hear from each of the panelists, you know, what is one campaign that sticks out from them, you know, from somewhere, you know, from either your own work or someone else's work on the continent.
Thank you so much. Will you take the second or the first question?
I'll tie in that question with that question, number one and number two. So I think you are 100% right about the notion that a lot of consumers feel that brands are just trying to make a sale. You know, at the end of the day, we're in business and we need to, you know, make money. That goes without saying. But building a sustainable brand is not just about the short term. And I think having a cultural point of view and building brands for the long term is, as you were saying, that's hard work. It's not lazy marketing. That means having a point of view. Sometimes the point of view might be polarizing, but having a point of view and leaning in and having an opinion on something is important. And so we try to bring that in to the work we do. That goes far beyond a traditional 60-second TVC. I think that's what a lot of people think marketing and advertising is. That's part of the mix, 100%, but it goes a lot deeper. And I think to your question about the blurring of the lines with PR agencies, ad agencies, you do see that because we're trying to be more integrated going forward. And I think it's so important that when we look at any type of communication we're putting out, you look at it more holistically than just by channel. And I think it's when the 1 + 1 = 3 comes to life, that's when campaigns truly resonate. But it's also about what the foundations are that campaign has been set on. So what is the authenticity behind it? What are the brand values? What is the purpose? And I think the example that I'll give you is recently we had the Africa Cup of Nations, Coca-Cola sponsor the Nigerian Football Federation, the Super Eagles. And we did a spot and a little bit of a cultural leadership push with that spot, where it went beyond AFCON and it went beyond the Super Eagles. It was about uniting, and we actually tagged it Nigeria United, where we look at all the good that's come out of Nigeria. And we tried to pull that together and actually show that together we can do so much more than apart. And so leaning into that cultural approach was something that I'm very proud of. I think the team are very proud of the work, and the team are here that actually did that work, where we went beyond just trying to sell a Coke or be the sponsors of the Super Eagles. We wanted to take it to the next level, to open a dialogue. And that required a holistic approach, not just from our creative agency, from our PR teams, and everybody else that was part of it, from our system, to bring that to life. So I think it's a great question, and I think you're going to see more of that. I think as the marketing mix shifts, as digital becomes more and more prevalent, as we see the growth in this industry, you're going to see digital agencies morphing into PR agencies, morphing into creative agencies, or offering a full bouquet of services. And that's going to be an interesting one to watch and see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and I think it's absolutely playing out daily. We've actually recognized that the new kind of battleground is kind of what we call earned media, kind of the creative ideas that create newsworthiness that doesn't have to be paid for, effectively. And in fact, if I think about it's really, and I mean, if I use the example just for ease of reference, if you look at awards now, you've got campaigns that feature in kind of integrated, then the same campaign features in PR, then the same campaign features in direct. It's kind of, and kind of what it's made us realize is actually, the explosiveness of a really good idea can kind of be recognized in a lot of different ways, and we've actually had to re-engineer our agency systematically to be able to deliver against that. So, whilst we've got all the services, so we've got digital, we've got PR, we've got social, we've actually created one centralized creative studio that feeds into all of those different businesses, because actually at the end of the day, what you need is a great idea, and a great idea has got great PR value. A great idea can have great digital value, you know what I mean? So we've kind of realized that, there's a group of people in the business that their job is to come up with the killer ideas, but those killer ideas can benefit PR and whatever, we've recently did a campaign for Siemens, which is called Fabric, and it was in Africa. It was kind of around digitalization in Africa, and it was, this really boring subject matter, and for really kind of a traditional big German, but it's quite a smart digital business. It was around creating a narrative for, what the future African smart city looks like. It was effectively, it was a PR thing, but it was an event. Different things, and it's it's one of the leading kind of PR campaigns right now. So, but it was a really simple, smart, creative idea, that's playing in PR, So I think that is definitely the way that we're having to think now. I really love. It was a few years ago, but I actually really like, and I thought of it yesterday when I saw that the Coca-Cola ad with the dog, but. There was a piece of work that Coca-Cola did a few years ago for, I think it was it was either the World Cup or the African Cup of Nations, but for Egypt, and it was kind of teaching the country, the players of the team, using like a really famous local children's song, something like that, and you kind of had and it was just this really clever, really smart understanding of culture. Egyptians, they're not following the team. They don't know who the new players are. Let's use like a rhyme, a children's rhyme, to teach them the national team. Like really clever, really smart. So that for me was a really standout piece of work,
Hello. Okay. I'm afraid we'll need to wrap up the session, but we have one last question, and Lolo, you will need to wrap up.
Thank you. My name is Biodu. I'm from Nigeria. So we've talked a lot about nuances, culture, looking inward and telling the African story. Now, advertising particularly is about telling particular specific messages to specific people from culture, from their nuances. So as agencies and clients, we put our best jobs together every year and we head to Cannes Global Award. And we submit these jobs to judges, international judges, who don't necessarily understand the culture. How do we create relevance in such situations? And then, do you recommend that we create our own platforms for awarding our own jobs? Thank you.
All right, that's a very good question. First and foremost, I think if you look at the way Cannes is structured now, Cannes is expanding in terms of the categories, and they're also becoming particular about regions. But if you also look at it critically, when you are filling those forms, they always ask that you should put forward your case study and the context. Now, where we most often miss it is when we just feel that this work is a great piece of work. It has, checked all the boxes. Yeah, there is local relevance, there is this, there is that, there is bottom line, there is impact, there is all. But then you've not been able to situate the context. Yeah, and where that is missing, the judge or the jury rather that will sit together and look at the work will not probably be able to situate it appropriately. But I tell you what, if your case study is well done, is awesome, yeah, irrespective of where the jury is coming from, whether it's coming from Korea or from wherever, you will still see that connection. Yeah, but to go back to your initial question, they are expanding now and they are focusing more on most of these things that you have talked about.
Thank you so much. Do you want to give it a shot?
I think we need to do both. I think we need to create our own platforms. There are some like the Crystals, but a lot of these organizations are international ones that then establish we need an Africa showcase. So I do think we need to create our own. And then for the first question, I think we need to just do more of our creativity, but also understand what we're up against. So it's an incredibly competitive, creative landscape. But I think, if you look at India, if you look at Singapore, if you look at, even some South American countries, they do it really well. Like they stick to their culture, they bring their creativity, but they recognize that they're competing on that kind of creative world stage. So it's both. I think it's both.
Just to add to the question that was asked about the PR, marketing, and so forth, definitely there's going to be increased harmonization. We should be expecting MarTech, we should be expecting customer experience to be falling into our mandates. Now, just as before I invite you to give your last word, Yuval Harari, in his book, in the latest book, 21 Lessons of the 21st Century, says those who own the data own the future. Are we confident in terms of our measurements, in terms of the way we collect data, in terms of the way we disseminate data amongst ourselves as peers? In closing, if each of you can just share what we can expect as game changers in the space of data as brand marketing and communications experts.
Okay, so for us, data is very big. I work within a group that has made considerable investment in for that purpose. There is a new set of people and we had to invest in because we recognize the power and the usefulness of data, especially when you want to say, how do I measure impact? How do I institutionalize this knowledge? How do I repeat the same thing for better result? There is no way we can survive what is coming without data. So it's coming back to, it's either you differentiate yourself with the data you have, or you just simply burn out and die. Next.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot that says data is the new oil and it fuels so much, and it does. I also don't think it's new though. Data has been around for a long time, and I think the organizations that have been able to harness and tap data effectively have moved far in advance to some of the organizations that are still catching up. So data on the one hand means nothing if you don't know how to use it. And again, it goes to the good and the bad side of technology, because you can have the data manipulation, you can have some of the privacy issues that come along with it, which you need to be aware of, and you need to be able to make sure that what you're doing with your data is compliant and it's linked to back to what your company stands for. From a MarTech point of view, data is going to help us be far more focused in our segmentation, in our targeting, in getting our message out to who the audience is that we want to get it out. So data provides an amazing platform, but it's a platform. How you use that data and how you take the insights and the human insights, which will remain, no matter what data comes up, what is the human insights behind it that can actually help you drive compelling communication? That's, I think, where the humanness still comes from. AI and data on its own are robots. Where does that humanness come from? That, I think, is actually where the Holy Grail sits. It's where that humanness can bring the data to life and make it work. That's where the next phase will be.
I think the future, you're right, the future is customer experience. And I think that 15 years ago, Nike launched Nike ID. It changed the game for them because they really started to get into that. And I mean, last week they've just launched Nike Adventure Club, which is a subscription-based model for children. They are going to change the game again because now they've got them for life. But what they're doing with data is creating super deep customer experience. What's amazing for me is that it's changing their products. So it's like, and we spoke about this yesterday, this idea of the total value chain, So they're using data to fundamentally change the product. It's not just about the advertising. So for me, standout brand, what Nike is doing with data, and the future is definitely customer experience, using data to harness customer experience. Yeah.
Thank you so much. You've been an amazing panel. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly a round of applause for my team.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lolo and gentlemen, for being wonderful on your panel. And of course, as mentioned, the future is customer experience. We ask our panelists to please stand for a group photograph. And we'll have Perez Tigidam join in this photograph. Perez, as you all know, is the founder and, of course, Chief Executive Officer of Aiden and Newton, and also publisher of The Nerve Africa. He also is our host. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our distinguished panelists. Marking the end of that session, Advertising and Marketing in Africa, and we swiftly move into our next panel just before we go on a quick coffee break to continue proceedings for the rest of the day. We are taking a look at perspectives on strategic corporate communications, reputation management, and stakeholders relations. And this is coming on the context of the fact that it's about time we have corporate communication managers take a seat at the table where there is an engagement on corporate reputation. And just yesterday, I remember, I think it was over lunch, I was having a discussion with Claudine, and I was giving her my experience, having looked after a private investment banking company back in the day, and they didn't quite see the reason why they needed communication or even having a department that looks after communication. But of course, it took a huge fight, not necessarily a physical fight, but it took a mental process to get them to rethink that even though they do a lot of their work behind the scene, it's very important to also have an office that caters to managing the reputation and, of course, the language of the organization. But, of course, to give us more in-depth conversations in and around strategic corporate communications, reputation management, and stakeholders. It's my pleasure to invite our next group of panelists to join in this conversation. Please join me to welcome Managing Director, Magna Carta Reputation Management Consultant, South Africa, Molehi Molekwa. Joining Molehi, it's my pleasure to welcome the founder, Managing Director, Seymour Media International, New York, my newfound friend, Claudine Moore. Claudine, you're up on stage. Can we also give it up for Group Head Communications and Brand, Loneem PLC South Africa. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Wendy Lowe. I know Wendy, I saw her a minute ago. Yeah, there she is. Another round of applause for Wendy. Amazing. This is going to be a really interesting panel conversation because it's going to be an all-women affair. Please welcome. Oh, do I hear the ladies in the house? Okay, please welcome our moderator for this panel session. She is the Chief Executive Officer of AML. Please welcome Emilia Asim-Ita. Well, the uniqueness about this
that's something here, but if it's an all-women's panel, then we deserve another round of So, over to me. Nelson is supposed to join us. Sorry, Nelson, we had to have our moment before you joined us. Anja, Trademark East Africa.
And Nelson and our very four distinguished female panelists. Welcome, Nelson. Thank you so much. All right, Emilia, it's all yours.
Okay, so is providing a bouquet variety of services. We'll come to that a bit later, but maybe to start, what are your perspectives? I'll start with Wendy. You're sitting closest to me. What are your perspectives on strategic communications, stakeholder relations, and those, elements, or should I say subsets of communication? I know you have both client side, I won't say brand side, but client side and agency side experience.
Yeah, so I think which there are different spokes, whether they be media relations, stakeholder relations, digital communications, but it's all really about driving reputation.
Yes.
And for me, that the thing that holds it all together and is really fundamental, I liked what was spoken about yesterday, is truth, it's accuracy, and it's a balanced level of transparency. I found that in my career, whether I'd been working in public service, in corporate, or as an agency, a good mix of that, underpinned by impossibly great content that is aimed at the audience and not really about fulfilling the egos of the people behind the organization. I think that's really what drives depth of communication. I think it's what drives traction of communication, but I think it also is what allows and hopefully creates room for dialogue, and most importantly, for brands that listen. I think that's critically important in what we do. So I'm driven very much by those things. Brands that listen, brands that allow for dialogue, but that are seeped in truth, in transparency, or at least manageable levels of transparency, as well as impossibly, and I mean impossibly great content. That's critically important.
I don't want to disrupt that. I'll get perspectives, but I have about 3 follow-up questions based on what you said.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. I think for me, my perception around the industry itself really stems from the fact that we have not owned our position as communicators. We have suffered a lot of identity crisis in terms of who we are and the role that we're supposed to play in the industry, whether it's through how we, we fit into the whole communication mix, how we elevate ourselves in terms of importance, in terms of the strategic role that we play. We have always allowed ourselves to be defined in terms of who we are. We find that we letting ourselves to be, the poor cousin of our partners in terms of advertising, whether it's through the budget that they get, whether it's through the prominence that they get in terms of engaging with the C-suite, how to position the brand. We haven't gotten to a point where it's communication or it's PR first when there are issues. Lately, I guess in the past decade or so, through the nature of things, how brands have really suffered. Only now there is this importance of actually it's not about what we tell people, it's what people see and know about us. So it's becoming important, the narrative that you actually you put out there, what you say about yourself, and that experience of what you say and what people actually get needs to marry each other, and that's when the trust and the belief in who you are is coming from. So there is more for us to do in terms of claiming our stake, in terms of owning the position, in terms of making sure that we are strategic, because that is what we do. We are strategic in nature in terms of counsels that we give to our clients, in terms of the issues that we are seeing, because also we are operating at the speed of culture. We are in touch with what's happening within the operating environment that we are in. So how do we make sure that we actually lend the ear of the executive? They understand that we are coming from a place of knowledge. So there's a lot that we need to do. But I must say that for the past decade, we are seeing a lot of change in terms of the elevation of strategic communication. It's not only just around media relations. It's not only around doing crises, but it's becoming a complete offering to big organizations and I guess to governments as well.
All right. Just before I get your perspectives, Claudine, I can no longer resist. Just add that. Do you, first your perspectives, and then second, do you, from your experience, do you consider that the clients, broadly speaking, understand the clear differences between some of the subsects of reputation management, or to them is it just one ballpark skill or service or outcome?
So good morning, everybody. Where would you like me to start first, with the perspectives? And okay, so leveraging what my colleague just mentioned in terms of identity crisis in who we are, I think that's absolutely spot on. And taking that further with the, it's like with the advent of social media, it then became who owns social. Is that with the PR team? Is that with the advertising team? Is that with the digital team? And of course, as a PR and comms person, I've always had the firm belief that we have always been telling stories. That's just what our business has been. The term storytelling has just sort of caught up with what we've always had to do. We've always had to tell stories about our clients, but the term storytelling wasn't necessarily what we used to do it. So I think our role as communicators continues to evolve, and I think it's becoming even more important as social media, well, it's not becoming, it is central to any brand, organization, individual's reputation. And as we're all finding out, it takes one slip, it takes one mistake for it to go viral, for it to go over social media, and the first folks that are called are the PR and communications people. We are the first people that are called. And I mention that because more and more brands and individuals are becoming quote-unquote victim to a crisis because of social. Even if it's not really a crisis, it can be made to be seen as a crisis, and we're the first people who are called. So I don't think that's going to change, and I think as a result we're always going to have jobs, and we're always going to be needed. So that's to answer your first question. In terms of do clients always know the difference? Some do and some don't. I think Those who do, great. Less client education, as I mentioned yesterday, and more getting on with the strategy and execution of the work. But then I also think it's important for those who don't to really explain what that is and explain what that is to both internal and external audiences. Because your reputation isn't just based and leveraged upon your external image, but also your internal employees. And employee engagement is a key part of reputation management.
Yeah. So let's hear Nelson's perspective, then come back to that, because most of the time employee engagement is considered from a different lens and not part of an internal, reputation management strategy, for instance, for organizations. Nelson, please.
Thank you. And I'm quite excited to be here with this panel of, I think being the only man, quite exciting. So I think for me, the one thing that I'll say is, the industry that we work in as comms, the model changes every 6 to 7 months. And that's due to the fact that we have new communication channels, we have media converging, we have new tools, we have new analytics. So in a sense, I find we're always playing catch up as communicators. And I think we probably need to do a little bit more, to be in tune and to be ahead of the game. That's one. Secondly, I think the role of communications in a lot of organizations is very marginal. We're not in the C-suite, and I think we need to argue a case. A lot of organizations just see comms as a go-to anytime you have maybe a crisis, and that's the time the comms team, probably becomes relevant, or if you're just issuing probably a press release. So the issue of strategic comms is still not top of mind for a lot of organizations, and I think, from our discussions today, I think we'll be able to unearth more. What can we do to actually bring ourselves into the C-suite to really advise organizations? Colleagues here have also mentioned, just the whole issue of employee comms. I feel that's quite important. Employees are part and parcel of reputation. They actually define your reputation for you. And if you don't do a good job in terms of how you engage with your employees, because first and foremost, they are your ambassadors. No one else is going to do your brand building, but first and foremost from your team, from your employees. So I think we really need to do a good job making sure that these employees are onboarded well.
All right. So just to maybe start again with you with respect to, playing catch up. Now, I want us to some extent also look at we've spoken a lot about outcomes. So now the process, which is the work that we do, most of the time. Do you think we as experts are the cause, of this catch-up that we play in terms of how we define ourselves? And what can we do to change that? What we say that we do, or what we recommend that is required to be done in each case in point, for instance?
So
it's on.
When you think about the new tools that are coming on board, you mentioned social media. I think now it's probably 6-7 years since we had the advent of a lot of these platforms coming with how we're working with these different platforms, and they do make or break organizations, and I think we've seen that in the past. So we need to integrate and make sure that it's top of mind. We also building our skill sets as professionals. And I think that's something that we need to look at moving forward. Secondly, for me, something that is also quite important is just analytics. When it comes to, if you think about reputation and analytics, are we investing a lot in data and actually understanding, our different stakeholders? What is their perception? How are they getting information from us? What do we expect of them? I don't think we're investing a lot in data and analytics, and how a lot of these other tools are also working in play. So I think we need to do a little bit more to bring all these tools together, understand, how we're getting info. From social media, there's already a lot of analytics that's already embedded in some of these platforms. But how are we using them to inform corporate and strategic comms for institutions?
Okay, I'd like to ask Wendy, you spoke about truth and listening brands. What is truth? Truth is relative. If you take a look at stakeholder relations, now what you say to each stakeholder, to a great extent, is filters from a body of truth or body of content, and that's relative to the circumstance. So when you say truth, I'd like you to, delve deep. What is truth, or what should truth be? That's one. And then the second would be to get brands to listen. That comes from having built trust. That's one. Two, also confidence in expertise. Now, as African communicators, do you think we're putting our best foot forward in achieving this, especially getting brands to listen, to trust us?
Okay, so the guy who spoke yesterday on one of the panels, I think he's an editor for a Chinese digital
Marcus
publication.
Ryder.
Yes. I found his talk extremely interesting because I think for me, truth lies in accuracy. And I think truth lies in listening, and listening with intent, and being very deliberate in asking leading questions. I think a lot of brands don't like asking those leading questions because often they represent or they unveil certain things about that brand that they don't like to hear.
With, yes.
And really that's what our role as communicators is, right, is to sift that accuracy and that information and that content, and whilst packaging it in a way that is digestible, if I may say so, to potential or to our clients, it is also having the courage to guide brands and clients to a place of truth that hopefully with time will lead to brand trust. That's really what we do.
Irrespective of the envisaged...
And there may be consequences. You may lose a client. But if you're not courageous enough, then all you are is really not at an advisory level. You are a person who implements the PR or the comms. And there's quite a distinction between that. And I think that's critically important. So it's in stakeholder relations. A lot of stuff is not documented. I work in communities that barely speak English, that barely have written, anecdotes, but there are stories that they tell. And when verified, when listened to with intent and respect, in there comes the insights. And I think in our listening brands, it's when people open up to you and you start to sift from all the stuff and all the fluff and start to get real insights about your stakeholders. I think that's critically important. And then you asked about our role as African communicators. I don't care if we're African or pink or yellow. If we are
communicators in the first place,
experts in this field, and I think it's what Mudiye was saying earlier, they have created between the practice of public relations and communication and thought leadership.
Thank you.
In speaking about that which we do, but speaking about it confidently, boldly, loudly, and with fact. And how we then take those spaces of thought leadership and start to create platforms that allow our voices to be heard, but to be heard in a way that starts to create an understanding of our role, but also what our sector is all about. So there is no place that we all congregate sitting here and gather insights, right? There is no common agreed upon measurement tool in public relations. And we fight amongst each other about which one is the better one. And it's just, I find it really regressing. And for me, the space that I want to play in my next
life?
Not life, this life, but in my next incarnation in this life, is that of thought leadership. And how do we package ourselves as a sector and as an industry and start to be a force to be listened to be respected, to be called upon first, or at least to be called upon first with those other ones that are called upon fought that in my organization, but it's a battle. It's a battle that you have to have energy for, to say, I am going to make sure that I'm going to kick that boardroom door open in that C-suite so that I make communication understood as a value creator to business objectives and the commercial needs of the organization. And that's really where you've got to play.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I know you want to react, but okay, I'll allow you to do that, because I wanted to talk to you about what you mentioned earlier about skills.
Okay. Now, I just wanted to build on what Wendy was saying, because this is a conversation that we've been having since we arrived here. It's just to applaud, Perez for what he has actually created here, because for us in the communication industry, this is what has really been missing. You have all these other platforms that are created for the, in the communication space, but not for public relations. And we really, we are seeing a great opportunity in this, that we can only grow it from strength to strength. But also the entry level in our industry, they are so low that anybody who feels frustrated in whatever career they are in, they think PR is the best thing that they can do. You would find that our industry is flooded with former journalists. Anybody who is a B2 queen think they can be able to really, put a story together, they can be able to give advice, and that has really decreased our value in terms of who we are, in terms of those executives who we provide, thought leadership to, or who we provide strategic advice to, do not take us serious, because the actual image of what we do, it's this kind of, sorry to say this as a lady, as a woman, but it's this kind of boobs and balloon. That's what PR is all about. It's all about parties, it's all about clicking of champagne glasses, and that's not what we do. We are strategic in our conduct, we bring value to the table, and when we come in and we advise, we have to make sure that that is understood, that we actually are bringing something that will help the reputation of the brand. So it's very important that as a collective, as people that are sitting here as communicators, we come together, we make sure that we are there to support each other, because otherwise it also gets very lonely out there, where you're just thinking that you are pushing your own agenda, and there's nobody also to listen to you. But the other point that I want to make is, as a consultant, it is very important we have brands or clients that understand their role within the organization. It's very difficult to try and bring about change, to try and consult to a client where they themselves, within the organization, they're not occupying the right position.
Structure.
They're not seen as somebody of influence. So you can sit, we can kick all the doors that we want, but if your actual immediate client is just seen as somebody who just takes orders and they're not even sitting at EXCO level, then we have a problem. So it's a bigger conversation that we need to have, so we can be able to really have an impact in terms of what we are doing.
I was going to ask you a question, but I still want to ask that question before I react to what you said, which is for consultants and those on the agency side. The issues of or challenges of dwindling budgets, a lot of, and I'll say this bluntly, mediocres in the space. And so when you say as African communicators, obviously we're not doing enough, but isn't that because most of the experts are pretty trying to survive, trying to keep their head above water with this stiff competition, as it were. So when you're trying to survive, how do you upskill? How do you continue to improve yourself? How do you speak truth, as Wendy said, at the risk of losing that account to the next person who is maybe waiting to implement your strategy?
And I think for me that is the problem. The fact that already we are so oversaturated. As I said, everybody thinks they can be in the industry. So there is not much care that is actually put in specializing. There is not much care that is put in being strategic in what you are offering, because you are trying to really just to survive, put your head above water. Just let me just get this one particular article, or let me just get an interview, and my client will think that I've done something. Was that the right thing? Was it the right thing to actually put your client in front of the media? Because that's not all that we do. We're not all about publicity. There's a lot of strategic advice that we give that is off camera. there is a lot of positioning that we do for our clients that nobody else see. And that's where the value that we bring. And sometimes when you put a price tag to what we do, clients don't understand because they just think, well, this is all that we do.
It's too expensive. It's just to place press releases, put out the story. I say to people, communication starts in the war room or boardroom with strategy before anything gets out there.
We also don't look at, I find we also don't collaborate. I guess because of the pressures of day-to-day living, and making and creating sustainable businesses that keep people employed, one is quite myopic in the view. And I think in times of economic pressure like we're going through, at least in South Africa, I think it's critically important that agencies start to collaborate, because I may find that there's something that Nelson can do better within an account that I have, or has better contacts and would add value to client that could then elongate my time as a supplier of my goods and services to said particular client. So I think there's a new model, and I'm quite glad that we're going through the things that we're going through, because it's forcing us to do things structurally differently. I think we've been doing things differently on a very superficial level. But I think now to structurally say, how do we collaborate? How do we consolidate? How do we organize ourselves in such a way that there's value that is passed through this value chain of different types of PR organizations and or agencies, but that give benefit to ourselves as well as to our clients. And I think that's critically important.
Okay, so I want to ask Claudine, again, 2 questions. Sorry. So the first is, you spoke about social media. What did we do? I mean, how did we allow influencers, and that's what they are, become PR and comms experts? Or let's not say they have become, or position, or even in some cases, be considered experts. I know you have a lot of experience. You've done this for a long time. And perhaps you can cast your mind back to the advent of social media and how it's taken root, and what we have as communicators or PR experts. It sort of seems to me that we took a back seat and didn't embrace that immediately. And now, as Nelson said, we're now, trying to play catch up. So what did we do wrong, and what do we need to do as experts to, I don't want to say reclaim the space, but to restructure and look inwards, as Wendy said, and sort of redefine some of these elements? Because if we do not, then the clients and the brands will not be well informed to engage and to work with us. So I'll allow you to answer that, and then I'll ask the next question.
So that I understand your positioning of influencers. So are you, is the notion that influencers are PR and communicators?
Yes.
Okay, because I don't necessarily, just to challenge what you're saying, I don't necessarily think that they are. I think we, first of all, there were bloggers, and then bloggers is an old term now. They're now influencers. I think we use them as part of our campaigns, as part of work that we're doing. But are they themselves actually PR communicators? I wouldn't say so. I think that they are a tool that we use for client work to communicate and to help influence audiences. But so I think there's a slight.
Maybe to give some context. From the work that I've done and in Nigeria, you find that sometimes clients bypass agencies and deal directly, in some cases, with influencers. You also find that some influencers have, should I say, repositioned or are now offering services which only provide the outcome of digital engagement and growth of virtual communities.
Well, that's interesting, because I think a client that was going to bypass a communicator and go straight to a user influencer, that's kind of lazy and not very strategic. If you want like a short-term win, and you just want to get visibility for something very, very short term, then it could work. But as part of a long-term strategy, which any brand or organization that is serious about their reputation should be looking at a long-term strategy. So if a client was in front of me, and well, I guess based on your example, they wouldn't be in front of me, they'd bypass all of us and go straight to the influencer. I would kind of query how savvy and how smart that client was in looking at their reputation long term. It may well have a great short-term win for them, but then we have to look at, I sort of operate from a notion of deferred gratification, and sometimes it's that deferred gratification. Yes, you want that short-term win, but that short-term win, easy come, easy go. Reputations are something that should be built up over time, and then they will stand the test of time. I want to go back to a few questions that you had before, because I made a few notes. So you were talking before, Nelson mentioned about sort of staying ahead of the curve, as it were, as
playing catch up.
As playing catch up. I think one of the areas that all of us should be thinking about is our role as PR and communicator, as PR, branding, media, and communication experts. Is what is our role with the advent of AI and virtual reality? Where are we with that? Technology. And I think that is one of. I'm always reading the industry and trade press about the thoughts, the current thinking on that, because I think that's the next thing that's going to happen, or it is happening, but making sure we position ourselves in that as well, because more and more clients are going to be using AI and VR as part of the way that they communicate. So that's one thing. And another thing, in reference to working with clients who don't want to listen to our advice. Yeah. So Gina mentioned that yesterday during her keynote, and I sent a tweet out and I said, she's absolutely right in her positioning that whilst we always want to be seen as collaborators and partners with our clients, we're also being brought on board as experts, and therefore we should sort of stand firm and as Wendy said, be quite courageous and confident in saying this is what you should do. At the end of the day, they're the client. If they decide to go a different path, ultimately that's their decision. But what you don't want is for them to talk to for you to just go along with whatever their desire is, for them to talk to another communicator and they say, well, why did your comms agent X suggest that you should have done X? And then the expert, why didn't you push back when I suggested that? So I think that's not simply, but it's a confidence, just having confidence. If you're working with a client and you have to, we've all had clients before that we don't want to lose. Nobody wants to lose a client. Everybody wants to retain a client. But sometimes there are ethical issues. Sometimes there are your own reputational issues. People know that you're working with that brand. And so you have to bear that in mind as well as part of your own personal reputation.
But you won't always agree, to follow up what you said, you won't always agree with your client with respect to the path to take. So in the case where the client listens, understands, but back to what Wendy and Nelson had said, is not high enough in the organization and says, well, this is our position, and you as the agency, you have to implement what is not best practice or what is not your recommended line of action.
So you're asking me?
No, I'm.
You're looking at
following up. No, I'm following up on that to say that even when you know that your reputation as an agency or an expert is at stake, you will not always agree with your client with respect to what you're recommending as best practice and what they decide to do.
No, you won't always agree with your client, and I think that's okay. Sometimes that's where the creativity is, and I think that should be embraced. You don't want to have a client that's just going to say yes all the time. Definitely. You want to have a client that sometimes pushes back. So in that back and forth, and in that sort of friction, if you like, creativity can come from that. And I think it's always important not to be arrogant about, I'm the communicator, just listen to me. We're here to be collaborators. We're here to collaborate, and we're here to produce great work for our client. And as a communicator, as a PR person doing that work to be able to be proud of the work you've done for your client. So sometimes that friction creates a lot of creativity, which should be embraced. But ultimately, I mean, if the client wants to go one direction, as long as it's not unethical, ultimately, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, at the end of the day, they are in that client vendor relationship, they are the ultimate leader. Leader says left, then you all go left. But if it's something that's unethical, then that's when it's a real problem.
Yeah. Okay. So Nelson, quick question before we take questions from delegates and participants. What's the role of networks? Wendy alluded to that slightly. It's one of the follow-up questions I wanted to ask. What's the role of networks? We have industry associations, we have networks, or we even have multilateral organizations that work in this space. What should they be doing in helping communicators, you know, not just come together, but push forward thought leadership and even best practices, you know, for the continent?
So I think, so for instance, the organization I work for, Trademark East Africa, we are a donor-funded organization that works in this region, in the East Africa region. And for us, because we get donor funding from about 10 organizations, 10 donor countries, that also puts a little bit of a spin when you think about who our stakeholders are. So it's not just about managing your stakeholders in this region, you know, your governments, your private sector partners here, but also managing your taxpayers, where the funds are coming from. And when I think about the networks that we're looking at, is how can we get a deeper understanding of what are the requirements from our donors? What do they want to know? What do they want to understand from a comms perspective that we can actually be able to provide? And I find that's lacking. So in a lot of times, we don't have that expertise with local agencies. So you still have to go out there and get an agency that will sort of provide you that level of support to be able to give you the insights for who our donors are or who the stakeholders are on the other end. So for me, that is a challenge, and I think the agencies here sort of need to either find collaborations with other international agencies that they can tap, create networks within some of these institutions. And I think that's quite important. I wanted to sort of take back a step, maybe just to chime in on the issue of influencers, because I think that's something that is driven from clients themselves. Yeah. I think influencers have come on board because of the metrics. You know, I as a client, if I have a campaign and I want the metrics, you know, I want high engagement, I want, a higher reach and all that, you know, I'll definitely look for influencers. Do they espouse my brand? You know, is it a risk for going with them? Not necessarily. But I think it's sort of, we've shot ourselves in the foot by requesting for these influencers to come on board. And we probably may need to think, you know, are we getting the best contact by using these influencers? It's something that we'll have to review.
Yeah, I also think it's a balance. I'll allow you, Wendy, between, as Claudine said, the long term, because you find some brands sometimes are under pressure as well to the hits, the numbers, the metrics, the analytics. So all hands on deck. You know, let's make it stick, and let's make it stick, and that's, you know, strictly from an outcome point of view. Let's make it stick immediately. You were going to say?
The issue of networks and then influencers. I think one of the things that I think is glaringly missing from an African perspective, at least in communications, is an unpacking or at least an investigation into an investment into research in our industry. So you talk about AI. I've just read a report done by Fleshman Hillard, and it's an extensive report, but it's obviously from a European first world perspective, right? It hasn't got the texture and the layers of an African context. So I don't think we invest enough using those networks into research, into trends that are forthcoming or trends that we come from, but that have become part of our system because we do traditional PR all the time. I mean, I always err towards traditional PR because some of this new stuff really it baffles me, and I find that younger people are more grips with it, and how to turn traditional content that I write
Digitized
into
forms.
biteable sized things that I don't quite know how to do. So I think there's a lot of there's a massive gap in how we invest in research that is going to give outputs that will be of benefit to the communication industry with a bias to the African continent in how we position ourselves to ourselves and externally. So that's the first thing. With influencers, I found the whole thing very interesting. So I consider myself quite old, and I call myself an elder, because some of this whole world of social media, besides Twitter, because I get Twitter, but the visual-driven social media really baffles me. Like, wow, is that how people really live every day? And it's really, I just find it a bit, sure. And do brands really buy into that people live like that, really? But they do,
Yes,
right?
they do.
So the one thing for me is, that I've been thinking about a lot is, well, there's what brands want. Brands want metrics, as you say. So 10 million followers, Whether you've got a conversion rate of 0.0001% doesn't really matter to them because you've blasted this thing to 10 million people, half of which are bots, half of which actually you've bought as followers. So you really have very few authentic followers. So where does communications find itself in that
mix,
organized chaos? And for me, it's not about then saying, oh, these influencers are coming into our space and turning themselves into comms and PR doers. No. Ours is to go back to what we do. We are content creators. We write the story. And where we show value is to show brand how that story written by that influencer could best be packaged in order to get the traction. And therefore, that then forces us to partner with these influencers in quite a different way, rather than seeing them as people who are encroaching in our space and taking what we are doing, is to say, how do we add value by what we are great at this. We are great at content creating. And you guys, you can look at any influencer, you can see the marketing speak in all their captions. And it's completely inauthentic. It's completely not who they are. And it's devoid of human truths. Because that's what comms is about. It's about amplifying human truths and making them relevant to a wider group of people. Our value is to say, let's guide. Let's give influence. And that's really where we should play.
Okay. Add on that. It's for
ask
us
you a question,
to,
but after you.
Sorry. It's for us just to also to welcome these new innovations. I think there's there's this fear that with AI it's going to take over our world. We will not have careers to operate in, but they're actually enablers. These are new channels that we need to be embracing, learning about them, because we learn each and every day. How do they enhance our work? How do we use them to our benefit? Just like in the traditional space where you have TV, you have print, you've got radio, you become strategic in terms of what message is relevant for what channel. So as much as now we have more channels, we need to be able to be advisors to our client, knowing the target audience that we are speaking to, understanding the narrative that we want to actually to share out there. Where will it be relevant? When do we use an influencer? We don't just use an influencer for the sake of, here's somebody with a following. You do proper analysis of who are the people that follow this particular person. Numbers, they mean nothing. If numbers don't mean anything anymore from an AV perspective, because when we do measurement, we're no longer looking at that, followership doesn't mean anything anymore. Sure. Who are the people that are following these people? Are they influencers themselves? Are they relevant to what we want to drive? So there is a lot that we have to still claw back, own, and guide. It's not all about the rush of taking a story out there. It's about making sure by the time that story goes out there, it actually delivers the strategic intent that you have set out to do. So I think the whole rush of trying to, break news on Twitter, the whole thing of trying to trend, It's something that we need to also bring a stop to. We need to be able to get our clients to understand that these channels, they can break or make you. And how do you make sure that you use them to your advantage? Because they are there to help. They are not there to scare anybody. So technology and all that it brings is really it's an enabler, and we need to still master it. It shouldn't just master us. It shouldn't be leading us.
Okay, so I was going to ask a question about research and skill, because you started off your perspectives about skill. Do you think that, and do you think, and then what needs to be done, do you think that we have local platforms where communicators can upskill and reskill themselves in line or in the light of technology, AI, and how these emerging sectors will impact on our work as experts? And then even if we look down the pipeline also for skill, because when she mentioned research and insight, I've always known public relations to be about stakeholder engagement, to be about content, to be about thought leadership. But now, in most cases, it's watered down. So what do we need to do if there are none? And do you think we have local platforms and should I say service providers where experts can reskill, upskill? And then down the pipeline, also to take a look at those who are coming into the industry, how and where are they getting trained?
I think for myself, in South Africa, especially with our agency, and I have to own up to this because I was having this conversation with our HR in terms of the new entry levels of people that we are looking into, that as leaders and people who are operating in the space, we have also not done ourselves justice, because we have divorced ourselves from whether it's a tertiary universities that are out there to be able to go to those schools, engage with the learners to say, this is what we are looking for. The PR that you think you know of, the communications that you think you know of this glamorous world of the first day I get to work, I'll be meeting Mr. So-and-so, I will be on TV and all of those things. It does not exist. You have to actually work your way up. You have to make sure that you understand the basics first. Ground yourself, root yourself, understand what the industry is all about. Understand yourself as well in terms of what you bring to this industry. Therefore, then you can slowly, grow up. Unfortunately, with social media, we are now living in this instant world. We think everything, it has to happen by the snap of the finger. My career I'm starting as an account executive, the next thing I'm going to be the MD of the company. It does not work like that.
Or start my agency.
You know what I'm saying? Or start my own agency if I don't see any progress according to my own timeline. It's not even, timelines that are realistic. It's according to my own timelines. I need to be at this particular stage in life. So we have a big role. As much as we have a role to play amongst ourselves in terms of collaborating, helping each other with the challenges that we are facing, we have a role to play in terms of giving back and helping the next generation to understand what this particular industry is all about, to take away the fluff from it, to show them the reality, whether it's taking a student or students to come through, spend a week, spend a month within the organization, just doing that internship, just role modeling to what we are. We have to do that, because otherwise we'll be sitting here 5-10 years to come and we'll still be complaining about the lack of recognition of our industry. Talent is scarce. In South Africa, I know with a number of my colleagues who've been talking about it, it's killing us. We don't have the right skill sets that are coming through. I've actually, did my own research and realized that we have 4 kinds of categories of skills. We've got people like myself, the Wendy's of this world, who have made it from a corporate level point of view. And there's nothing then that we can, we will not leave and start our own businesses or anything like that. Then we have the next level of young black talent that is there in corporates. And if you need them from an agency point of view, you cannot afford them. So as somebody who runs a communication consultancy, I struggle with skills because I cannot afford some of the packages that these young people are asking for. Then we've got a group of young people who just think that, you know what, I'm an influencer. I'm coming into the agency already, I'm an influencer.
I'm an expert.
I'm an expert.
Yeah, that's
you
what
know,
I was
and you
saying.
can't do anything with that particular person. And you can't even put them in front of a client because they argue with clients, they know it all. So it becomes a problem. You know, do I keep this person or do I actually move them so I can keep my client and then do the work myself? So we find ourselves that we really have to start looking at how do we bring the next level of consultants, of our communicators that really are there for the long haul and they bring value.
Okay.
The other thing I think to add on to what Willier is saying, the other thing is I saw an extract, guys, from the University of South Africa that described public relations. It went something like this, and I'm paraphrasing here. Public relations is the act of writing a press release, sending it to media for publishing. You can hope that if your story is correct, the media will publish it, and in that way, it is free and it is cheap. That was the sum total of a summary of public relations in 2019. So my issue with this thought leadership space, which is why I'm so passionate about
thought
it,
leadership.
is there's two sides to this, right? There's talent we need. That could be raw talent that you kind of nurture and mold and do all that. And I was that person, right? So I got my degree after I started working, but I had somebody who saw my talent and they kind of nurtured it into me, then saying, oh, well, maybe I should do this tertiary thing kind of thing. And then there's the back end to say, how do we influence educational institutions to make sure that these industries that we go into represent us in the way that we are? Because right now, guys, public relations is still being represented the way it was in 1952. And it is our job to change that. And then in terms of expertise, I guess at our leadership level, I am obsessed at the moment.
And training opportunities.
Yeah, and looking at opportunities. I'm obsessed at the moment with how comms intercepts with law and intercepts with technology. And I'll tell you the key drivers that in South Africa at the moment, we're going through all these commissions and inquiries, and I think the legal fraternity is making a whole lot of money, and quite honestly, I think I should get into it. But I'm also influenced by that. In the organization I work in. Communications is about investor relations. It's about how legal influences that, and then it's about how that content is created. So why not then, for me, get a short course or whatever it is that I can around law, whether it be commercial law or something like that, but also how do I maybe infuse it with data analytics or some kind of technological or digital course that will bring all these kind of skills together. So I think there's a lot that we can do even at that expertise level just to sharpen your mind, to get with the program and be a bit more current. But the one thing that really, really irks me is the influence we need to play as leaders in communications in terms of how our sector, our fraternity is represented, particularly at tertiary institutions.
Thank you. We'll take questions. When it comes to tertiary institutions, I don't want to go.
I have to say just one thing, because I think we would be remiss to sit here and have a panel about reputation management without talking about the crucial element of corporate social responsibility. And so I'm not going to labor the point, but I just think if you have a panel about reputation management, CSR is such an important part of that because of the halo effect of CSR. Startups that we're increasingly working with, we advocate quite strongly that from the beginning of their DNA as an organization starting up, they incorporate CSR. So I know we're going to take questions, but I just think that if there's anybody from the audience who has any thoughts on the role of CSR, it'd be great to have some questions on that as well, so that that can be mentioned, because it would be remiss to have a panel about reputation management and not mention that.
Okay, I didn't want to go into CSR because it's pretty deep and broad. I worked in CSR for 8.5 years, and that as a tool for reputation management has so many sides to it. But it's a good point to note, and it would be good if also a few persons have thoughts about that, and then maybe you would speak about that as part of your closing statement. Because Henry, yes, time. And I see we have a lot of hands.
Yeah, we have a lot of hands. So I would ask our delegates, please introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And more importantly, we need you to keep
Henry,
your
I need to
questions
change
short.
that a bit for this session.
Okay.
Can you please tell us your name and what you do? Not where you're from, what you do, so that it helps for us to know context. What part of communications do you work in? Please. Henry, please.
Okay. And please keep your questions or comments very, very short. Okay, we'll start with this question.
Right, thank you very much. My name is Yao Kuono from Ghana. I work as a Senior Communications and Investor Relations Advisor. So this is a very interesting panel, and no wonder there's a lot of interest from the participants. You've done a good job touching on the broad issues. I think that, okay, I'll go on to my question now.
Please.
How do we, as communications people, demonstrate return on investment beyond reporting the metrics? I understand that social has come to change. We are so concerned about how many people we are reaching, how many are reading our messages, but at the table of decision, it deals more with two main things: how much revenue is coming in and how we are cutting down on cost. So how do we as comms people demonstrate that return on investment? Thank you.
Thank you. So how do we do this? Do we assign certain panelists to take certain questions, and then we take them in rounds so that we can deal and
questions, then we answer
yes,
them
3 and then
okay.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Perumal, and I speak for Africa in the work I do. I'm a journalist turned publicist, and we own a media agency in South Africa. This conference has become my most important leverage because I come from Johannesburg, South Africa, with the highest amount of unemployment right now, with the biggest influencers all wanting to come into the space, and with every single journalist opening up a PR agency every single day. So what I've been doing in the work we have been creating in the last 15 years, so it's taken me 15 years to get into this room. Thank you, Perez. Please give him a round of applause. You know, I started a TV station, I took a loan, and I call it EC Africa Entrepreneur Connect 100. It only has 200 people.
Question, please.
So my question is, it's not a question, it's a comment. We keep on wanting to validate what's wrong with Africa. When we are the future, when we look at TEDx and TED and how they germinated and how they seeded into their own movements. And I think Speak for Africa and the Nerve Center creating this platform gives us an opportunity in PR, in reputational management, to learn from Bell Pottinger and learn from fake news. When I led the team at the African Union, I realized there isn't a centralized database for African journalists. There isn't a centralized news agency. So we as practitioners in this room today hold the baton of where we're going to go to forward. So even if we create relevance on Facebook and Twitter today, we at least birth in, and these are the new words I'd like to bring in, how do we create a tribe into a movement, into an ecosystem, and how do we then collaborate in 54 countries with 1.9 billion people and create relevance for ourselves in the tools we have as PR, publicity, communication, as agencies on the continent. And that's what I'd like you to look into.
All right, thank you. How
Thank
do we
you, Vanessa.
collaborate? Central database for communicators and continent-wide representation.
Yeah.
If I am
One more
summarizing
question
correctly.
and you respond.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Choma Aniwe from Nigeria. I work in corporate communications for an electricity industry. So in this room, I have two major challenges, and we've also talked about it here, but my question is, how are we going to achieve it? One of it is not being in the room. I think Nelson mentioned it, where decisions are taken, and you're supposed to be the guy with the broom and the packer waiting to clean up the mess if it backfires. How do we get the executives to acknowledge the part that corporate communications has to play, starting from the boardroom? I think one of you mentioned that it starts from the boardroom. That's one. Two, the issue, I think Wendy in her opening said, is about truth, is about accuracy. Yes. So that means that what I'm going to communicate has to align, and someone also said, is about what people see and not what you say. So that means internal processes has to align with what I'm going to tell people out there. How do I make management? How do I balance it when this is what they want me to say against what the happenings inside are? So I need to know the balance. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So Nelson, would you take that?
Yes. So, I think in a lot of times, I don't know how many of us in our institutions, when you look at the corporate KPIs, whether you have communications as one of your KPIs in your institutions, at that level, if you don't have it, then it's going to be very hard for you to argue a case at C-suite. So in a lot of cases, I tell a lot of my peers that you need to drive your KPIs, your corporate KPIs, and have comms as one of them at the organizational level, so that as an institution, the institution actually sees comms as a relevant, outcome and a relevant goal and objective for the organization. So that has to be quite clear. And when you do that, it's easy for the C-suite to actually support you and to drive that ambition within the organization. So I think that's how I'll respond to it.
When you waiting to answer, and then Wendy.
Just to build on that in terms of the matrix and how do we actually deliver on the ROI, it's to Nelson's point, it's very important to be clear in terms of what you are driving towards. What are the objectives? Why are we doing what we are doing? Because sometimes we find ourselves just pulled in because there is this particular campaign or there's this particular issue that is happening, and we must just have PR in here. We must just have comms in here. And when we come in, because we haven't actually defined who we are, we just get in there and then we just agree this is what we're going to be doing without actually questioning what is the objective of this? Why are we doing it? What do we want to achieve? So as I mentioned earlier on, that from a measurement point of view, we have moved away from AVEs. We're now using the Barcelona principle in terms of SMART objectives, setting those up and understanding what is it that we want to get out of things. Things have to be specific, measurable, and all of those good things. So going in from a campaign point of view, from a brief point of view, you have to already go in knowing what you want to achieve. Saying that you want to raise awareness, that is not an objective. That is not something that you can be able to measure. So if we understand what is it that we want to do, it's then easier once the campaign is done, once the problem has been solved, to say, these were some of the key things that we actually wanted to deliver on. If this is something that we wanted to actually get the message across to this particular audience, this is the channel that we're identifying who will actually drive that message. If we do get through and use that particular channel, then that is something that we actually can tick off and say we have achieved our objective. So we also need to understand from a reputation point of view, reputation is built over a period of time. Sure. It's not something that today you have an issue, tomorrow you must have a success story, or that you'll have this glorified reputation. It's something that is sustained, it's something that is built over time. So we also, again, I think for me, is being able to understand and speak the language that executive understand in terms of how you build a reputation. You cannot just measure it immediately and say, this is the return of investment. It's not like I went and I sold a cell phone. I said, this is how many cell phones we have, this way at cost, this is how much I'm going to make profit of. That is not how we trade. We have to make sure that over a period of time, we are able to change perceptions. We are able to actually to track how the conversation has actually changed. So it's a lot that has to happen that unfortunately from a business perspective might not be seen as you are doing.
I'll try and answer all three. Just in terms of return on impact, I've always, and measurement, I've always struggled with it, to be honest, because a part of me is still a fan of AVE, to be quite honest, because, you know, if I was to pay for it, there would be a cost, wouldn't there? And that's something quite tangible for people to understand. And I work in an environment of engineers. And this whole thing of like, when's, is this, you know, did we do good or did we not do good? And how much would this have cost us? So in all this new sort of measurement analytics that I use, I always do put in the AVE report, because for some people, that's how they make, that's how they create the connection, right? But I rely a lot on research and coding. So I've spent a lot of money just building up within our media monitoring researchers and coders who then look at a number of different metrics that are important to our organization. And those include message resonance. So in all the output that we have out there, is there message resonance to what we had wanted to get out? Number two, how many mentions did we get? And that's really important. They seem like small little things, but they're actually quite important. Did we get any third-party endorsements, and are those people credible? Are they influencers, and not influencers in the social media sense?
Digital influencers.
Yeah, so are they influencers, and has their word added value to what we had initially intended? We look at headlines, because headlines are important for us. You know, is the headline contextualizing the story in the way that we had wanted to? And then also, we look at visuals. I've started to look at visuals. Are the visuals that accompany the story, if not supplied by us, are they representative and adding value to the story? And those are the kind of metrics that I'm now working with the agency and a digital specialist to kind of say, these are the things that we want to be looking at. How do we create some kind of a formula that then looks at these things and starts to rank them and comes out with the number?
Yeah. Is it on page 1? Is it on page 50?
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And then the other thing for me that a lot of us often forget, the one thing that irks me in what I do is when a journalist takes my press statement and regurgitates it exactly as is, because I know that they have not engaged.
Not at all.
And that is why I invest in an educated media about my sector and about my company, because you start to see it in the contextualization and the deepening of the understanding of the issues that you're talking about. That's a very critical measure to say what journalists are writing about me. Are they writing about me just by copy and paste, or are they engaging with my story? And if they're not, how do I then invest in educating and empowering them to understand my subject matter better so that they can contextualize it better? And that's critically important.
Thank you, Wendy. You're done.
Yeah, then on the central database thing about, what is it? About central database. Guys, I think it's a business opportunity. I mean, why not
create one?
Yeah, create one. Why not own a platform that then consolidates our sector and creates a business opportunity that says that's the place that we go to as a sector. So, hey, it's out there. Somebody do it.
Okay, next. And this will be we're late for the break, please. Is the mic working? Okay, I guess.
Put the mic on. Okay. All right. Comment or question?
My name is Zubaida Jaffa. I'm from South Africa, and I'm a research fellow at the University of the Free State, attached to the Communication Science Department. I think this panel has hit it on the head. Very important work has to be done at the university level. I run 2 websites, and one of the multimedia website is called The Journalist. And this was an attempt by a few of us a few years ago to intervene in the university sector in journalism. And it's taken us 5 years to get the universities to finally come on board. And we are changing the narrative, but painstakingly. And I can assure you that that is a very important area where we must begin. Because these young students are going through the university, and you won't believe what they are being taught. It is shocking, absolutely shocking. And I was so shocked that my question is really, I can go on about this. My question is there a possibility that this conference can set up a little working group and we can talk today and tomorrow and see how we can either use the platform that we have already or create something where we can share and give you all the benefit of what we have learned in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So, working group.
Okay, so I'm just going to, the first part of the attendees' comment. I'm an adjunct professor at NYU.
Yes.
I teach 3 subjects. I teach corporate social responsibility, hence I mentioned it earlier. I also teach global engagement, and I also teach global public relations. So not everybody knows what the term adjunct means in the American context. We don't have it in the UK either, but it essentially means that you're a business person who teaches at a university, like executive classes. So most of the students that attend the CSR course, well, all courses really, they're all executives. It's one evening a week. What I will make reference to is the intake of executives who tend to skew to it could be anything from mid to late 20s to 60s, so broad range. But generally speaking, the executives, the younger ones who are entering into the corporate social responsibility, which a big piece of that, as you know, as you mentioned, you've been doing it for a while, is a piece of that is communications. And so going to the point from the question that was posed, is I'm always astonished at how some of these executives who are taking this course are doing the CSR course but have absolutely zero comms experience. So I understand that the essence of CSR is that, the organization is being a good corporate citizen, and that should be where it begins and ends if one is being altruistic, but we don't live in an altruistic world. Most brands are doing CSR to enhance their reputation. And so in order for it to enhance their reputation, both internally and externally, you have to communicate that. So you have to be able to communicate. And so many of them can't. So, my reason for accepting the professorship at NYU when I was invited to take it was specifically for the reason that the question was posed. The skill set is poor, and it's up to us individually to, as you were saying, maybe mentor, all of us mentoring. Doesn't matter what age we are, there's always somebody who knows less than us. Even if you're a young person yourself, there's somebody a lot younger than you who needs to learn. And also, if you have the time, a lot of universities are looking for business people to be adjunct professors and to lend some period of time. I mean, it is a commitment. I'm not going to say it's not. It's definitely not. With everything else we're doing, it's a lot of work to add on. But it's important work because you are, I think Maya Angelou said, when you get to a certain point in your career, it's important to teach. And it's important to share that knowledge, and the sort of the legacy that any of us should want to leave as we sort of go through our careers is helping others and knowing what the sort of some of the challenges are. We know that it's talent, we know that it's skill. So bringing that to the forefront, and by ourselves upgrading or working on the raising of the skill level in the sector.
Okay, last question. Oh, okay.
And I think we as communicators, I think the point of giving back and using our expertise, whether you do masterclass opportunities, I think that needs to come out now more often, because if you're expecting to get a caliber of skilled folks who are going to come into the industry and they have no clue, they haven't been exposed, I think we're lying to ourselves. So I think we have to put in the time to provide, whether it's our input into courses, into providing master classes. The other thing is, I think in every country there's a public relations association. And I think we need to work with some of these associations to make sure that they're also working with the governments to look at what is the curriculum looking like for some of these courses, because I think that's part of what I would assume these associations' role would be. So let's work closely with them as well. There are platforms at country level, and they will really help us to make sure that we have the right kind of curriculum. Because I can tell you, it's not only in South Africa where you have a poor curriculum for PR. I think it's probably in the rest of the countries.
Yeah, no, it's not just South Africa. I think one of the biggest mistakes I made, just where the mic comes on, was going back to study for a master's in communication. It was an absolute waste of my time. I didn't think that I learned anything significantly different from what I did and my experience at the undergraduate level. So, and then even going further, whilst we wait for the microphone, at the doctorate level, which is what I'm considering, you find that you don't have opportunities to be supervised on the more relevant topics and subject areas or disciplines, as it were. So
okay, we'll take the last question because we need to wrap this up.
Please. Thank you, Mimi. Thank you.
Hi to the panel. Thank you so much for a great discussion. It seems that in every other industry, everybody's talking about the fourth industrial revolution, AI, et cetera, and sometimes it feels like we're not necessarily on the bandwagon. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what PR looks like in the future when we live in a world where if a client wants to reach the editor of Forbes, they can just DM them on Twitter and pitch a story, and if it's interesting enough, it will land, the front page. Given that of PR, very recently somebody told me crisis management, media relations, a lot of the things that we talk to our clients about are capabilities, but they're not necessarily products. So as we go towards the digital future that we all look forward to, what does PR look like within that landscape? Thanks.
Okay, we expect very short responses from our panelists so we can wrap up. Emilia. We apologize for the humming sound you hear. It will be resolved, but you can carry on, Emilia.
Yes, okay. I was waiting to be put back on. So thank you, Mimi. You've asked, you're clairvoyant, I can see. You've asked sort of the question that I'd like to wrap the panel with, and that's looking forward, into the future. And maybe just zoom out a bit from not just PR, to the communications industry, as it were. She's asked about the future and what you see with attempts to productize PR. But I want you to take that and a closing remark on when it comes to strategic communications, stakeholder relations, and all of that for Africa. What would you like to see in the next few years? What would you like to see?
Sure. To try and answer you, Mimi, and I'm going to answer you honestly. I'm still grappling with what this 4IR is myself, to be quite honest. At least coming from a South African perspective, where it's the word that is bandied around every single day, I'm not entirely sure at this stage how it will manifest into my area.
I think mine is working,
it's
so
fine. So
it's
I'm
back.
reading up about it, and I think I'll have a much more, a much deeper understand, a little bit more investment of myself in reading. Having said that, I firmly believe in three things about communications. Whether it's marketing, it's advertising, it's public relations. I think that relationships are currency. I think that truth and accuracy are critically important. And I think investment into impossibly great content is paramount. I don't think anyone can take that away from us. And that's really where I think the nexus of our investment in this industry as technologies change should be. Because that's where we most add value.
Thank you, Wendy.
So that's really what I think.
And I guess that's also what we want to see.
Well, what do I want to see? I just want to see, I want to see the different countries, South Africa in particular, because I come from there, but also the continent, take its rightful place in not just creating new narratives. I think it's telling the old narratives and telling them well. I think we sometimes get obsessed with newness and we forget the wisdom and the richness of that which already exists. So for me, it's to boldly go out there and to confidently go out there and to courageously go out there and tell these accurate stories. I love the word accurate. I think it's so great because the balance thing kind of threw me yesterday as well. But I think let us invest in telling accurate stories about our countries, about our continents, and do it boldly, because one thing I know from the first world, a story well told, but more importantly, a story told over and over and over and over again is what sticks. I think because of our chase for newness, we create these stories, we tell them, they don't stick, we try and find something else. Let's tell these stories over and over again until even we believe them. And I think that's really what it is that I'd like.
So I think from my side, I'll start with your question in terms of what would I like to see happen from an African perspective. I think for me personally,
trust. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to go on a coffee break. We will reconvene in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Sound yavuyeho. Yeah. Yasubiyeho. Ubu ni sawa, ibintu byose ni neza. Nta noise ihari, ni uruhande rumwe. Yes. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Yes. Yes. Check 1, 2.